When she was diagnosed with a spinal tumor at a young age, her father suddenly vanished and never returned. She always believed he had abandoned her because she was a burden, unwilling to care for her or pay for her expensive medical treatment. But 15 years later, having survived her battle against cancer, she discovered a strange old envelope in the attic addressed to her from her father. What she read in that letter would reveal the true reason why he disappeared exactly when she needed him most. The truth was far different from what she had always believed, unveiling a heartbreaking and shocking reality that would change everything. Before we dive into this gripping story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the living room as Maya Rowan pushed open the front door of her childhood home. At 25, she carried herself with the confident posture of someone who had overcome significant obstacles, her laptop bag slung over one shoulder, and a stack of legal textbooks clutched against her chest. "I'm home, Grandma," she called out, slipping off her shoes at the entryway. Laura Rowan, a woman in her early 70s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, looked up from her armchair where she was watching a documentary, a porcelain teacup balanced delicately in her hand. Her face brightened at the sight of her granddaughter. "There's my girl. How was class today?" Laura asked, lowering the volume on the television with the remote. Maya set her books down on the coffee table and collapsed onto the sofa with a sigh. Exhausting but fascinating. Professor Harlow was discussing precedent in criminal liability cases. You know, the ones where someone commits a crime under duress. She straightened up, her enthusiasm evident as she continued. There was this case from 2018 where the defendant claimed they were forced to drive a getaway car because their family was being threatened. Laura smiled warmly. "That sounds right up your alley. Criminal law was always going to be your calling." She took a sip of her tea, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You're such a smart woman, Maya. There's a whole future ahead of you. Your father would have been so proud." The animation in Maya's expression faded instantly at the mention of her father. She stood up abruptly, moving toward the kitchen. "I doubt that," she said over her shoulder, her voice cooling several degrees. "Dad wouldn't care. He left a long time ago, remember? If he didn't care for me when I was young and sick, he wouldn't care for me now." She yanked open the refrigerator door, grabbed a can of soda, and popped the tab with more force than necessary. The silence that followed was heavy. When Maya glanced back into the living room, she saw her grandmother had gone quiet, a sad, distant look in her eyes. Laura cleared her throat, took another sip of tea and stared at the television screen, though it was clear she wasn't watching anymore. The tension hung in the air as Maya busied herself preparing a quick lunch. She pulled ingredients from the fridge, lettuce, tomatoes, sliced turkey and cheese, arranging them on the counter with methodical precision. The silence was suddenly broken by a familiar jingle coming from the TV, the opening theme of Tom and Jerry. Maya let out a sardonic chuckle, shaking her head as she sliced a tomato. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered. "That was your dad's favorite show," Laura said softly from the living room. "He used to watch it every night before bed, remember? We could hear that music throughout the house." Maya's knife paused mid-slice. "I don't need or want to be reminded of him, Grandma," she said, her voice tight with restrained emotion. "Nothing will change how I feel. He left because I was bound to a wheelchair, because I was a burden with my spinal tumor. He chose to walk away when things got tough." Laura's shoulders slumped slightly. "Would you like me to change the channel, dear?" "Please." Laura switched to a cooking show without another word, and the kitchen fell silent again except for the rhythmic sound of Maya's knife against the cutting board. The tension that had settled between them seemed to thicken the air. Maya stopped cutting the vegetables and set the knife down, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She took a deep breath, knowing her sharp words had hurt her grandmother, the one person who had never abandoned her. Maya walked back to the living room and crouched down in front of Laura's armchair. She took her grandmother's weathered hands in her own and looked directly into her eyes. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she said softly. "I didn't mean to be rude. I love you and I am forever grateful for everything you've done for me." Her voice wavered slightly. "You sacrificed everything to pay for my spinal tumor surgery 15 years ago, while Dad, who was supposed to take care of me, just left. But that's not your fault, and I shouldn't take it out on you." Laura looked at Maya with sad eyes and nodded silently. She leaned forward and planted a gentle kiss on Maya's forehead, her hands trembling slightly as they framed her granddaughter's face. "I know you must miss him," Maya continued hesitantly. "He was your son, after all." At this, Laura's expression changed, her composure momentarily slipping as though she might cry. But with the resilience that Maya had always admired, she pulled herself together, though her eyes remained glassy with unshed tears. Maya wrapped her arms around her grandmother's thin shoulders. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Grandma, and I promise I'll always stay and take care of you. You don't need to be sad anymore for someone who left us to survive alone all these years." There was a long moment of silence before Laura spoke, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "I know how much you love me, Maya," she said. "But just for today, can you please give your old woman some time to memorize your father? You see, I'm getting older now, and your father wasn't always the bad man you remember." She paused, her gaze distant. "There were beautiful years, and he is my son. I want to remember those good things about him." She looked back at Maya, a gentle smile on her lips. "You'll understand that when or if you become a mother someday." Maya considered her grandmother's words, feeling a twinge of guilt for her earlier outburst. She nodded slowly. "Of course, Grandma, take all the time you need." She returned to the kitchen to finish making her sandwich, not offended by Laura's request. From the kitchen, she heard the television switch off, followed by the soft sound of Laura's bedroom door closing. A few moments later, the familiar crackle of the old record player drifted through the house, playing a song that Maya instantly recognized, one of her father's favorites. Maya finished assembling her sandwich and sat at the dining table, eating quickly as the music continued to play in the background. The melody stirred memories she had long tried to suppress. Her father carrying her on his shoulders at the park, his patient voice as he helped her with homework, the way he'd stayed up all night when her pain was at its worst. She pushed her plate away, suddenly not hungry anymore. The music was too much, too many conflicting emotions she wasn't ready to face. She stood up and headed upstairs to her room, hoping the distance would dull the sound of the past. Maya climbed the stairs slowly, her mind still churning with unwanted memories. As she reached the top landing, something caught her eye. The door to the attic wasn't properly closed, a sliver of darkness visible between the door and its frame. She paused, wondering if her grandmother had been up there earlier while she was at university. The attic. Maya had been avoiding that place for years. It held too much of her father, too many memories she had worked hard to bury. It had been their base camp, as he called it, a secret hideaway where they'd shared stories and dreams away from the rest of the world. After her diagnosis, when she was confined to a wheelchair, he had even installed a stair lift so she could still access their special place despite her mobility challenges. Now, staring at the partially open door, Maya felt an unexpected pull. She approached slowly, intending to close it properly, but something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the conversation with her grandmother, or perhaps it was the music still faintly playing downstairs, but curiosity and emotion got the better of her. She pushed the door open instead and began to climb the stairs. Halfway up, she coughed as dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through the small attic window. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of old wood and forgotten things. When she reached the top, Maya was surprised to find the space remarkably clean for a room that had been unused for so long. There were no cobwebs hanging from the rafters, and the wooden floorboards looked as though they had been recently mopped, though a layer of dust had settled over the tarps draped across boxes, toys, and old furniture. Maya switched on the single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting a warm yellow glow over the room. Her eyes were immediately drawn to the far corner where their base camp had been, a thin mattress now covered in dust, with faded pillows and blankets neatly folded at one end. She moved toward it, memories flooding back with each step. The countless hours they'd spent up here, reading comics by flashlight, her father's animated voice bringing superhero adventures to life. The way he decorated the sloped ceiling with glow-in-the-dark stars so she could have her own night sky when her pain kept her awake. Shaking herself from her reverie, Maya decided to at least check the condition of her old belongings, stored in the nearby boxes. She knelt down, pulled back a tarp, and began sorting through the contents. Threadbare stuffed animals, children's books with dog-eared pages, a shoebox full of seashells from their only vacation to the coast. Each item she touched released another memory, another piece of a childhood that had ended too abruptly. A doll her father had given her for her 10th birthday, a hand-drawn get-well card he'd made during her first hospital stay, small tokens of love that contradicted the narrative she'd constructed about him over the years. As she moved to another box, her hand brushed against something unfamiliar, a blue sleeve folder tucked between two board games. Maya didn't remember owning anything like it as a child. Curious, she pulled it out and opened it to find a sealed envelope inside. She turned the envelope over, and her breath caught in her throat. Written across the front in a familiar slanted handwriting were the words, "Only to be opened by Maya Rowan." Her father's handwriting. With trembling fingers, Maya broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside, her heart pounding in her chest. "Dear Maya," the letter began, "when you are reading this letter, I hope the dangers are over and you are safe and healthy. First, I want to apologize for not being there to see you grow up. Please know that I never meant to abandon you, and leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I love you more than life itself, and everything I've done has been to protect you and give you a future." Maya's eyes blurred with tears as she continued reading. The letter detailed a bank account opened in her name with $70,000, money her father had set aside for her education and future. But what made her hands shake was the confession that followed. Her father had taken out loans to pay for her spinal tumor surgery, a procedure that had saved her life but put him deeply in debt to dangerous people. "I borrowed from the wrong people," he had written, "but I had no choice. Without the surgery, the doctors said you wouldn't have survived. I don't regret it for a second. Every breath you take, every step on your own 2 feet, is worth any price I had to pay." Maya sat back on her heels, the letter clutched in her hand, confusion and anger washing over her. This couldn't be true. All these years she had believed her grandmother had paid for her surgery, that her father had simply walked away when things got too difficult. She needed answers. She needed the truth. With the letter in hand, Maya stumbled back down the attic stairs, determined to confront her grandmother about what really happened 15 years ago. Maya rushed down to the first floor, the letter clutched tightly in her hand, and knocked on her grandmother's bedroom door. She noticed the music had been switched off, the house now eerily quiet. "Grandma," she called, knocking again more forcefully. No answer came. She tried the doorknob and peered inside. The room was empty, the bed neatly made as though no one had been there at all. Strange, Maya thought. Her grandmother had just gone in a few minutes ago. "Grandma." "Are you home?" Maya called out, her voice echoing through the house. She checked the kitchen, the living room, even the backyard, but Laura was nowhere to be found. Concern growing, Maya walked out the front door and scanned the garden. No sign of her grandmother there either. She stepped out onto the sidewalk and looked up and down the street, shielding her eyes from the late afternoon sun. That's when she spotted her. Laura was crossing at the far intersection, her slender figure moving with purpose, a shopping trolley bag trailing behind her. "What the hell?" Maya muttered to herself, confused by her grandmother's sudden departure. She hurried back inside, grabbed her phone and wallet, and dashed out the door to follow. By the time she reached the intersection, the light had changed, forcing her to wait. She bounced anxiously on her toes, watching her grandmother's figure growing smaller in the distance. As soon as the light turned green, Maya broke into a run, weaving between pedestrians until she caught up to Laura. "Grandma," she called out, slightly out of breath. Laura turned, genuine surprise flickering across her face. "Maya, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," Maya replied, trying to catch her breath. "Why did you leave without telling me? Where are you going?" Laura adjusted her grip on the shopping trolley handle. I called up to you earlier, but you didn't answer. I thought you were still upset and wanted to be alone in your room. I'm just heading to the supermarket to pick up a few things for dinner. Maya opened her mouth to mention the letter burning a hole in her pocket, but hesitated. The street was crowded with afternoon shoppers, and this conversation required privacy and time, neither of which they had at the moment. I'll come with you, Maya offered instead. Keep you company. To her surprise, Laura shook her head. No need, dear. You should rest at home. I know you have that evening lecture later. It's okay. The lecture isn't for another 4 hours, Maya insisted. Besides, I don't want you carrying heavy groceries by yourself. Laura lifted the shopping trolley bag slightly. It's no problem at all. This little thing can handle whatever I buy. She smiled, but there was something off about it, a tightness around her eyes that Maya had rarely seen. Before Maya could protest further, Laura had turned and continued walking, her pace surprisingly brisk for a woman her age. Maya stood on the sidewalk, bewildered by her grandmother's unusual behavior. Laura had never refused her company before. If anything, she usually seemed grateful for it. Maya knew her grandmother could be stubborn. It was a family trait, after all. But this was different. Something wasn't right. She was about to cross the street and return home when she felt the envelope in her pocket, the bank account, her father's confession. Suddenly she had a new destination in mind. The bank would still be open for another half hour, and it wasn't far, just in the opposite direction from where her grandmother was heading. Maya checked her watch, 3:30 p.m. She had plenty of time to verify the account's existence before her evening lecture. With a last glance at her grandmother's retreating figure, she turned and headed toward the financial district, determined to uncover the truth her family had kept hidden for 15 years. Maya approached the bank, its glass facade gleaming in the late afternoon sun. From a distance, it appeared relatively empty, typical for this time of day as it neared closing. She quickened her pace, eager to get inside before they locked the doors. As she was about to cross the final street to the bank, a familiar figure caught her eye. Maya frowned, squinting to make sure her eyes weren't deceiving her. It was her grandmother, walking on the opposite side of the street. Not toward the supermarket as she had claimed, but in the direction of the train station. What is she doing? Maya whispered to herself, confusion giving way to suspicion. She changed course, crossing the street to follow Laura. From a distance she observed her grandmother's purposeful stride, so different from her usual unhurried pace. Laura entered the train station, blending into the crowd of commuters heading home for the day. Maya quickened her steps, following her inside. The station was busier than she expected, filled with the after-work rush. She scanned the area, catching glimpses of her grandmother's silver hair as she moved through the throng of people. Just as Maya was about to call out to her, she realized she couldn't proceed further. A turnstile blocked her path, and her transit card showed insufficient funds when she tapped it. She stepped aside to the top-up machine, joining a line of impatient commuters. As she waited, she kept her eyes fixed on where she had last seen her grandmother. To her surprise, Laura didn't head toward any of the platforms, but instead turned a corner toward a quieter section of the station. Maya abandoned the line, knowing she couldn't afford to wait. She exited the station and quickly made her way around the perimeter, hoping to spot her grandmother through the fence that separated the station from the street. There, about 20 yards away, she saw Laura standing in a secluded area, speaking with a man Maya had never seen before. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a black leather jacket despite the warm summer weather. His stance was imposing, almost threatening as he loomed over her grandmother. Maya watched as Laura handed over the shopping trolley bag to the man. He partially unzipped it, peering inside before saying something Maya couldn't quite hear over the ambient noise of traffic and distant train announcements. She caught only fragments. This month, right amount. The exchange looked practiced, routine, as though this wasn't the first time they had met like this. Maya's heart raced as she tried to make sense of what she was witnessing. Was her grandmother being extorted? Was this connected to her father's letter? She was about to call out when the man suddenly looked up, his gaze locking with hers through the fence. He pointed, and Laura turned, her face draining of color when she spotted Maya. "Maya, go away!" Laura called out, her voice strained with fear. "Run!" I'm coming to you, Maya shouted back, already moving toward the station entrance. I'll get security. No, Laura cried, but Maya was already running. Before she could reach the crowded part of the station where she might find help, a gloved hand clamped over her mouth from behind, an arm like steel wrapping around her body, immobilizing her. She struggled against the grip, but it was futile. A second man appeared in front of her, his face expressionless as he raised something in his hand, a small blackjack or sap. The last thing Maya saw was her grandmother's terrified face in the distance before pain exploded at the back of her head, and darkness swallowed her consciousness. Maya's return to consciousness was gradual, like swimming up through murky water. First came the throbbing pain in her head, then the awareness of her body, slumped in a sitting position, arms pulled uncomfortably behind her. When she finally managed to open her eyes, she found herself in an unfamiliar room with faded wallpaper and sparse furniture. She was bound to a wooden chair with zip ties cutting into her wrists, a gag silencing any sounds she might make. The chair itself was secured to a wall-mounted heater with a metal chain. Someone had put thought into her containment. Panic surged through her as the reality of her situation crystallized. She tested the restraints, twisting her wrists against the plastic zip ties, but they only bit deeper into her skin. She tried to call out, but the gag muffled her voice to a pathetic whimper. The sound of approaching footsteps made her freeze. The door swung open, and 3 men entered the room. Maya recognized one as the man her grandmother had met at the train station. They were smiling, completely at ease, as though kidnapping was an everyday occurrence for them. The man in the center, older than the others with salt and pepper hair and a face lined with years of hard living, stepped forward. "Well, well, Sleeping Beauty's finally awake," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. "You look just like your father, you know that?" Same eyes, same stubborn chin. Maya tried to speak against the gag at the mention of her father, but produced only muffled sounds. The man chuckled. "Where are my manners?" He gestured to one of his companions, who stepped forward and roughly removed the gag from Maya's mouth. "Who are you?" Maya demanded, her voice raspy. "Where's my grandmother?" "Vince Morello," the man introduced himself with a mock bow. "Your daddy and I were business associates, you could say." He circled her chair slowly. "And your grandmother?" "She's fine. For now." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. "What do you want from us?" Vince stopped in front of her, bending down so they were eye to eye. "What I've always wanted. What your father still owes me." "I don't know what you're talking about," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. "No?" Vince straightened up. "Your grandmother's been paying me every month for 15 years now. Faithful as clockwork, that woman. But it's never enough, not with the interest." He shook his head in mock sadness. "And now you've gone and complicated things by sneaking around behind her back." Understanding dawned on Maya. "The letter." "Yes, the letter," Vince confirmed, pulling the familiar envelope from his jacket pocket. "Your grandmother had a deal with me. She pays and I leave you alone. Simple. She's been protecting you all these years." His smile turned cruel. "But it turns out Grandma's a big liar." He waved the letter in front of Maya's face. "Your dear departed daddy and your grandma. They've been hiding my money in your name this whole time. $70,000. That's a lot of money to hide from someone you owe." "My father is dead?" Maya's voice broke on the question, though she'd already suspected the answer. Vince's eyes gleamed with malice. "Oh yes, has been for a very long time now." He leaned in close, his breath hot against her face. "I killed your lovely daddy myself. He didn't pay up and he lived with the consequences." Tears welled in Maya's eyes, not from fear but from a profound sense of loss and betrayal. Not by her father, but by the lies she had believed about him for 15 years. All this time, she had thought he abandoned her because she was a burden with her illness. The truth was infinitely more painful. He had sacrificed everything, including his life, to save hers. "What happened to my grandmother?" Maya demanded, her voice stronger now despite her tears. "Where is she?" Vince laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Don't worry, her duty's not done yet. We'll keep her here until you sign over that account to me. Otherwise... He drew a finger across his throat in a universal gesture. I'll give you the money, Maya said quickly. I don't care about it, just don't hurt her. She's all I have left. Too easy. You really are just like your father, Vince said, his tone dripping with forced cheer. That settles it then. Tomorrow our lawyer will draft the paperwork and you'll sign everything over, nice and legal. He gave a nod to his men, who promptly turned toward the door. Wait, Maya called after them. Can I see my grandmother? Please, I need to know she's okay. Vince paused at the doorway, his hand on the knob. You'll just have to trust me on my word, he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Be a good girl and maybe you'll both walk out of here alive. The door closed behind them with a final click, leaving Maya alone with the crushing weight of the truth and the terrifying uncertainty of what tomorrow would bring. The room grew dark as evening descended, the only light filtering in through a small window high on the wall. Maya remained bound to the chair, her muscles aching from the forced immobility, her mind racing with everything she had learned. Her father hadn't abandoned her. He had sacrificed himself to save her. For 15 years, she had nursed her anger and disappointment, building a wall of resentment against a man who, in reality, had given everything for her. And her grandmother, loyal, steadfast Laura, had shouldered the burden alone all this time, making monthly payments to criminals while never breathing a word of the truth to Maya or police. Why had no one told her? Maya was 25 now, not a child to be protected from harsh realities. She'd had a right to know. Anger flared inside her, not at her father anymore, but at the unfairness of it all. This morning she had been a normal law student, attending lectures and planning her future. Now she was bound in a strange place, her world turned upside down, facing criminals who had murdered her father and threatened her grandmother. Her thoughts turned to Laura, wondering if she was somewhere in this same house, equally afraid and uncomfortable. Was she hurt? Was she blaming herself for not hiding the letter better or for following Vince's orders for all these years? Maya's anger slowly softened into understanding. Laura must have been protecting her, just as her father had. Perhaps she feared that involving the police would strip away the money her father had sacrificed for her. They had both made impossible choices out of love, carrying burdens that should never have been theirs alone. The realization brought tears to her eyes. For years she had been angry at the wrong person, nursing a grudge against a ghost while the real villains walked free, continuing to terrorize what remained of her family. As darkness settled completely over the room, Maya's thoughts were interrupted by voices outside the window. She strained to hear, dragging her chair backward until it leaned against the wall beneath the window. With her eyes closed, she focused all her attention on the whispered conversation happening outside. Dig, rid the old woman. No use. Police. The fragments were enough to send ice through her veins. They were planning to kill her grandmother even after getting the money. The promise of freedom had been a lie. Panic surged within Maya, followed by a cold, clear determination. She and her grandmother would not die here. Somehow they had to escape before morning came. But how? Bound to a chair with no idea where in the house her grandmother was being kept, the odds seemed insurmountable. Yet as fear threatened to overwhelm her, Maya thought of her father and grandmother, their courage, their sacrifices. If they had faced these same men for 15 years to protect her, she could find the strength to save them both now. Maya tested her restraints again, looking around the room for anything that might help. There had to be a way out. There had to be. The door creaked open, startling Maya from her desperate planning. She tensed, expecting Vince or his men to return, but instead a young woman entered, slender, with dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, carrying a plastic cup of water. She couldn't have been more than 20, her face bearing a weariness that seemed out of place on someone so young. "They told me to give you something to drink," the woman said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She didn't meet Maya's eyes as she approached, her movements cautious but practiced. Maya studied her, noting the way she carried herself, resigned, subdued. This wasn't her first time bringing water to a captive, Maya realized with a chill. How many others had been kept in this room? Had her father once sat in this very chair? The young woman brought the cup to Maya's lips, tilting it so she could drink. Maya took several greedy gulps, her thirst more intense than she had realized. When she had her fill, she gazed directly at the woman. "Please," Maya whispered, "help me. They said they killed my dad, Evan Rowan. Have you ever seen him?" The woman's eyes darted nervously to the door, but she said nothing, her face carefully blank. Yet there was something in her expression, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, that Maya couldn't miss. "Please," Maya pressed, lowering her voice further. "I need to know what happened to him. Did you know my father?" The woman remained silent, but Maya noticed her hands trembling slightly as she stepped back from the chair. She was afraid, but there was more to it, a hesitation that suggested she wanted to speak, but couldn't bring herself to. "My grandmother is here somewhere," Maya continued, desperate to establish some connection. "They're going to hurt her. Please, if you know anything." The woman finally met Maya's gaze, and in that brief moment of eye contact, Maya saw a depth of pain that matched her own. After a long pause, the woman put a finger to her lips in a silent gesture and leaned in close. "My name is Kesha," she whispered, so faintly Maya almost missed it. "I know your dad. They killed him." Then she straightened up, her face resuming its blank expression as she turned toward the door. Tears sprang to Maya's eyes at the confirmation of her worst fears. "Wait," she called softly, but Kesha was already leaving, the door clicking shut behind her. Maya sat in stunned silence, grief washing over her anew. Though she had suspected it since reading the letter, having it confirmed made it real in a way she wasn't prepared for. Her father was truly gone, murdered by the same men who now held her and her grandmother captive. Minutes passed, or perhaps it was longer, time had become difficult to track, before the door opened again. To Maya's surprise, Kesha had returned. She walked quickly to Maya's side, speaking in an urgent whisper. "I can't help you without them suspecting me, so if you want to find your grandmother or whatever, you have to do it on your own," she said, her eyes continuously darting to the door. "If they find out I helped you, they'll kill me and my brothers." Maya stared at her in confusion. "Why are you helping me at all? It's dangerous for you." Kesha's expression softened slightly. "Your dad saved my mom, used some of the loan money to pay her debt, gave us another 3 months to live." Her voice caught. "That's before they killed him. After the 3 months, my mum couldn't pay the interest and they killed her too. Took me to serve here. Said they'd spare my brothers if I did everything they wanted." "How long have you been here?" Maya asked, horrified. "Almost 15 years now," Kesha replied, her voice flat again as though discussing the weather rather than her captivity. Maya's mind reeled at the revelation. This young woman had been a prisoner here since she was a child, all because her mother, like Maya's father, had fallen into debt with these criminals. Kesha reached into her pocket and slipped something cold and metal into Maya's bound hands at the back of the chair. "This is all I could get without looking suspicious," she whispered. "It's a fork." Maya's fingers closed around the utensil, recognizing it as a potential tool to free herself. "Thank you," she breathed. "Can you at least cut the zip ties for me?" Footsteps sounded in the hallway outside, and Kesha's eyes widened in fear. She quickly moved to the wall and plugged in the heater next to Maya's chair. "Use that," she whispered, gesturing toward the heater. "Your grandmother is in the room at the end of the hall on the left. Use the window to get out, then the back gate." Before Maya could ask anything else, Kesha was at the door. She turned back briefly, mouthing "good luck," before slipping out into the hallway, leaving Maya alone with her new tool and a desperate plan forming in her mind. Seconds after Kesha departed, the door swung open again. One of Vince's men, a hulking figure with a shaved head and tattooed forearms, entered the room, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the space. "Please," Maya said, trying to sound desperate rather than calculating, "I need to use the bathroom." The man snorted. "Vince said specifically you stay in the room," he replied, unconcerned by her discomfort. "You'll have to hold it or do it right there." He gestured vaguely at the floor beneath her chair with a smirk. Maya mustered her most pathetic expression. "Could you at least loosen these ties? They're cutting into my skin." "Not happening," he said flatly, already turning to leave. "Don't try anything stupid, we've got eyes everywhere." With that, he closed the door, the sound of a lock clicking into place following his exit. Maya waited until his footsteps faded, before examining her situation with renewed focus. The fork Kesha had given her was still clutched in her hands behind the chair, and the heater beside her was gradually warming up. She knew what she needed to do, use the heat to weaken the zip ties, but executing the plan would be painful and dangerous. She tried first to use the fork as a tool to pry at the zip ties, working the tines between the plastic and her skin. Despite several attempts at different angles, the zip ties remained stubbornly intact, designed to tighten rather than loosen when pulled against. "Come on," Maya muttered through gritted teeth, frustration mounting as each attempt failed. She turned her attention to the heater. It was now warm enough that she could feel the heat radiating from it, though not yet hot enough for her purpose. Carefully, she tried to maneuver the chair closer, the metal chain connecting her to the heater clanking softly as she moved. Once positioned as close as possible, Maya attempted to use the fork as a conductor, holding it against the heater to heat it up, then pressing it against the zip tie. But after several attempts, it became clear that the metal wasn't retaining enough heat to melt the thick plastic. Then disaster struck. The fork slipped from her sweat-slicked fingers and clattered to the floor behind the chair, just out of reach. "Damn it!" Maya hissed, twisting around as much as her restraints would allow, but the fork remained tantalizingly out of reach. She'd have to try another approach. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Maya leaned back in the chair, forcing it to tilt until her bound wrists were as close to the heater as possible. The heat was much more intense now, almost uncomfortable against her skin. She inched her hands closer to the heating element, steeling herself for what she needed to do. When her wrists finally made contact with the hot metal, pain shot up her arms, an immediate searing agony that brought involuntary tears to her eyes. Maya bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood as her teeth broke the skin. She focused on her grandmother, on the fragments of conversation she'd overheard about digging a grave, on the 15 years Laura had spent protecting her at enormous personal cost. The pain was nothing compared to what would happen if she failed. She held her position, the plastic zip tie gradually softening against the heater's surface. When she felt it give slightly, she pulled her wrists apart with all her strength. The plastic stretched, thinned, and finally snapped, freeing her hands. Without pausing to celebrate this small victory, Maya bent down and retrieved the fallen fork, then set to work on the zip ties binding her ankles to the chair legs. The process was quicker now that she had the use of her hands, though the burn wounds on her wrists throbbed painfully with every movement. Finally free from the chair, Maya stood on shaky legs, her cramped muscles protesting after hours of forced immobility. She tucked the fork into her pocket. A makeshift weapon was better than nothing, and surveyed the room for her belongings. There was no sign of her phone or wallet. They must have been taken when she was brought in. Maya moved to the window, carefully testing the latch. To her relief, it wasn't locked, or rather the lock was on the inside, within her reach. She worked it open slowly, wincing at every small creak, and pushed the window outward. Cool night air rushed in, a welcome relief after the stuffy room. She peered outside. The window opened onto the side of the house, where dense bushes and trees offered cover in the darkness. The ground was only about 6 feet below, an easy drop if she was careful. With one last glance at the door to ensure no one was coming, Maya hoisted herself onto the windowsill, swung her legs outside, and lowered herself as far as she could before letting go. She landed in a crouch among the bushes, the soft earth muffling the sound of her impact. Staying low, Maya made her way along the side of the house toward the back, following Kesha's directions. The property wasn't large, but the overgrown garden provided ample hiding places as she crept toward the back gate, pausing frequently to listen for any sign of pursuit. The gate, when she reached it, appeared to be secured with an old padlock, its metal corroded from years of exposure to the elements. Maya retrieved the fork from her pocket and carefully worked it into the lock mechanism, leveraging the tines against the weakened metal. After several tense moments, the lock broke apart in her hands, falling open with a soft click. Heart pounding, Maya eased the gate open just enough to slip through, then pulled it closed behind her. She found herself in a narrow alley that ran behind the row of houses, dimly lit by distant street lamps. Without hesitation, she broke into a run, putting as much distance as possible between herself and her captors before they discovered her absence. Her only thought now was reaching the police station and bringing help back for her grandmother before it was too late. After running for several blocks, Maya slowed to catch her breath, her lungs burning with exertion. She took in her surroundings, trying to orient herself in the unfamiliar neighborhood. To her relief, she recognized a street name. She wasn't far from the main road that would lead to the police station. The night had grown cooler, and Maya shivered in her light clothing, her adrenaline beginning to ebb as the pain from her burned wrists and the ache in her head intensified. But she couldn't stop now, not with her grandmother still in danger. She set off again at a brisk pace, sticking to well-lit streets where possible. Within 20 minutes, the illuminated sign of the police station came into view, and Maya broke into a final sprint, bursting through the front doors with such urgency that the officer at the desk immediately stood up in alarm. "Please," she gasped, holding out her injured wrists. "I need help. My grandmother's been kidnapped. They're going to kill her." The desk sergeant, a middle-aged woman with a stern face that softened at the sight of Maya's burns, quickly ushered her to a chair and called for assistance. Within moments, Maya was surrounded by officers, one of whom brought a first aid kit for her injuries, while another began taking her statement. "My name is Maya Rowan," she began, her voice steadier now that help was at hand. "I was kidnapped this afternoon from the train station by men working for someone named Vince Morello. My grandmother, Laura Rowan, is still being held at the house I escaped from." She detailed everything that had happened, the letter from her father, following her grandmother to the train station, waking up bound in the strange house, and her conversation with Kesha. The officers listened intently, one of them taking notes while another made a phone call, presumably to request backup. "I overheard them talking about killing my grandmother and digging a grave," Maya added, her voice breaking slightly. "Please, we need to hurry." "We will, Ms. Rowan," one of the officers assured her, his expression grave. "Can you direct us to the house?" Maya nodded emphatically. "Yes, I remember the way. I can show you." Within minutes, a tactical plan was formed. Maya would ride with two officers in an unmarked car, directing them to the location, while additional units followed at a distance to avoid alerting the kidnappers. They would not use sirens, approaching quietly to maintain the element of surprise. As they drove, Maya sat in the back seat of the police car, her bandaged wrists resting in her lap, anxiety gnawing at her as she guided the officers through the dark streets. "Turn left here," she directed, recognizing the corner where she had stopped to catch her breath during her escape. "It's down this road, about halfway on the right." The house looked different from the front, an ordinary suburban dwelling with peeling paint and overgrown hedges, nothing to suggest the horrors within. Maya pointed it out, and the lead officer radioed the backup units, coordinating their approach. "Stay in the car, Ms. Rowan," the officer instructed firmly. "We'll handle this." Maya watched through the window as officers in tactical gear moved silently toward the house, taking positions at all exit points. Then, with a coordinated swiftness that spoke of extensive training, they breached the front and back doors simultaneously. From her vantage point in the police car, Maya could hear faint shouting, then the sound of running feet. A figure burst from the side of the house, Vince attempting to flee into the night. Before he could get far, an officer tackled him to the ground. Even at a distance, Maya could see Vince's face contorted with rage as he was handcuffed and led to a waiting police car. Minutes that felt like hours passed as Maya waited anxiously for news of her grandmother. Finally, she saw officers emerging from the house, and among them, supported between two uniformed figures, was Laura, pale and disheveled but alive. Relief washed over Maya, tears springing to her eyes as she watched her grandmother being guided to a separate police vehicle. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, a silent understanding passing between them. As the officers returned to the car, Maya leaned forward eagerly. "Is she okay? Can I see her?" "She's shaken but unharmed," one officer replied. "The paramedics are checking her over now. You'll both be taken to the station for your statements, and then you can be together." Maya nodded, settling back against the seat as the car pulled away from the curb. The nightmare wasn't over. There would be statements to give, legal proceedings to endure, emotional wounds to heal. But her grandmother was safe, and for now that was enough. The police station hummed with activity as Maya was led to an interview room, a stark space with grey walls and a simple table with chairs. Through an open door across the hallway, she glimpsed Laura being escorted to a similar room. Their eyes met briefly, and Laura mouthed sorry with a pained expression. Maya shook her head, mouthing back, "We'll talk later," before the doors closed between them. Inside the interview room, Maya sat across from a detective who introduced himself as Detective Harmon. His manner was professional but kind as he started the recording device and asked Maya to recount everything that had happened, from finding the letter to her escape from the house. Maya spoke steadily, describing each event in detail. When she mentioned the letter, Detective Harmon nodded. "We recovered that from Vince Morello's pocket during his arrest," he said, sliding an evidence bag across the table. Inside was her father's letter, now slightly crumpled but intact. "This is important evidence," Detective Harmon explained, "but I wanted you to see that we have it. Can you tell me more about the bank account mentioned in the letter? Did you have a chance to verify its existence?" Maya shook her head. "No, I was on my way to the bank when I spotted my grandmother at the train station. I haven't had a chance to check if the account is real or how much money is in it." "We'll look into that," the detective assured her. "What else can you tell me about Vince Morello and his operation? You mentioned a young woman named Kesha who helped you escape." Maya described Kesha as best she could, explaining how the girl had been held captive for 15 years after her mother's murder. "She told me my father had helped her mother with her debt before he was killed," Maya added, "and she knew where they—" Her voice caught. "Where they buried my father. She said it was in the backyard of the house." Detective Harmon's expression grew solemn. "We'll investigate that claim immediately," he promised. "If your father's remains are there, we'll find them." The interview continued for another hour, with Maya providing every detail she could remember. When they finished, Detective Harmon thanked her for her cooperation. "You've been incredibly brave, Ms. Rowan," he said as he stood. "An officer will take you to the medical section to have those burns looked at properly, and then you can wait in the reception area while we finish with your grandmother." Maya nodded gratefully, exhaustion beginning to set in now that the adrenaline had fully worn off. She followed a uniformed officer to a small medical room where a paramedic gently cleaned and rebandaged her wrist burns, applying a soothing ointment that dulled the pain. When she was finally led to the waiting area, she found Laura already there, a blanket draped over her shoulders, a cup of tea cradled in her trembling hands. The moment their eyes met, Laura set the cup down and opened her arms. Maya rushed into her embrace, both women clinging to each other, as though afraid the other might disappear. "I'm so sorry," Laura whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I should have told you the truth years ago." They settled into chairs in a quiet corner of the waiting room, away from curious eyes. Laura's face was lined with exhaustion, but there was relief there too, the relief of no longer carrying her secret alone. "Tell me what happened," Maya said softly, "when Dad disappeared. The truth, all of it." Laura took a deep breath. "When your father couldn't repay the loan, Vince and his men started visiting our house. They threatened him, beat him sometimes." She closed her eyes briefly, the memory clearly painful. "Then one day they took him. I never saw him again. I don't know exactly what happened or how he died. They only told me later that he was gone." "Why didn't you go to the police?" Maya asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Your father made me promise not to," Laura replied. her eyes glistening with unshed tears. He said it would be too dangerous, that they would come after you if I involved the authorities, and the authorities would also confiscate the money that he meant for you, so I kept paying, month after month, to keep you safe. She reached out, taking Maya's hand gently, mindful of her injuries. You were never supposed to see that letter. The dangers weren't over. Your father borrowed a very large sum, and even after 15 years of payments, the debt had only grown with their outrageous interest rates. A tear slipped down her cheek. Evan told me not to give you the letter until it was safe. I had cleaned the attic just this morning, thinking perhaps I should find a better hiding place for it. But I didn't want to disturb your old things. I never imagined you would go up there today and find it so quickly. Laura hesitated, then looked down at their joined hands. There's something else you should know, Maya. She took a deep breath. That bank account your father mentioned in the letter, it's real. I've known about it all these years. Maya's eyes widened. You knew, but then how? Your law school tuition, Laura said quietly. It didn't come from my savings or the second mortgage as I led you to believe. It came from that account, the money your father set aside for you. What? Maya breathed, stunned by this revelation. Laura nodded solemnly. Our family lawyer, Mr. Goldstein, was entrusted with the account details before your father disappeared. He helped me access just enough each semester to cover your education. It was the only way you could attend university, Maya. My pension and part-time jobs were barely keeping us afloat with the monthly payments to Vince. All this time, Maya whispered, a new understanding dawning. I thought you were working yourself to exhaustion to put me through school. I thought it was your sacrifice. It was your father's sacrifice, Laura corrected gently. He wanted that money to secure your future, and I couldn't think of a better use than your education. Mr. Goldstein helped manage it carefully, making sure there would still be enough left when you graduated. She squeezed Maya's hand. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I was trying to protect you from the truth about your father, about the danger, and you were so angry with him already. Before Maya could respond, she noticed Kesha being escorted down the hallway by a female officer. Maya stood quickly, catching the attention of a nearby policeman. That's Kesha, she said urgently. The woman who helped me escape. Can I speak with her? The officer nodded after a brief consideration, just for a moment. Maya approached Kesha, who looked even younger and more vulnerable under the harsh fluorescent lights of the police station. Thank you, Maya said sincerely, for everything you did. You saved my life and my grandmother's. Kesha's eyes fell to Maya's bandaged wrists. You got burned, she said softly. Maya nodded. It was worth it to get away. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. You said you knew where they buried my father. Kesha's expression softened with sympathy. In the backyard beneath the old oak tree. They made me help dig the hole. Her voice faltered. I was just a kid, but I remember. I've put flowers there sometimes when no one was looking. Fresh tears welled in Maya's eyes at this unexpected kindness. Thank you for telling me, and for remembering him. An officer approached, indicating that Kesha needed to continue her statement. Before she was led away, Maya clasped her hand briefly. We'll help you and your brother, she promised. You're not alone anymore. Maya returned to her grandmother, relaying what Kesha had told her. Laura wept quietly at the confirmation of her son's fate, a grief that had been deferred, but never truly processed, now finding its release. As they sat together in the quiet corner of the police station, a detective approached them. We've dispatched a forensic team to the location Ms. Kesha indicated, he informed them. We'll find your father's remains and we'll make sure he receives a proper burial. Maya nodded, gratitude and grief mingling inside her. After 15 years of anger and misunderstanding, she would finally be able to say goodbye to her father, not as the man who abandoned her, but as the father who had sacrificed everything to save her life. The cemetery was peaceful on the warm spring morning, sunlight filtering through the leaves of ancient oak trees that stood sentinel over the rows of headstones. Maya and Laura stood side by side before a simple granite marker, freshly installed and bearing the name Evan Rowan, along with the dates that bookended his too short life. It had been just over a week since Maya's escape and the subsequent police raid. The forensic team had recovered her father's remains exactly where Kesha had indicated, and DNA testing had confirmed his identity. Today they had finally laid him to rest properly with dignity and respect. The small funeral service had been attended by a handful of people, Laura's friends from church, a couple of Maya's professors who had heard about her ordeal, and surprisingly several police officers who had been involved in the case. Detective Harmon had come as well, standing respectfully at the back during the ceremony. Kesha was there too, under police protection. She stood a short distance away now, a delicate bouquet of wildflowers in her hands, waiting for her moment to approach the grave. Her brother, a solemn young man just a few years older than her, stood beside her, supporting his sister as she faced the emotional task of saying goodbye to a man whose kindness had meant so much to her family, even if it had been brief. Maya knelt beside the headstone, placing her hand on the cool granite surface. The bank account her father had mentioned in his letter had indeed existed, the full $70,000 intact and untouched for 15 years. She had already decided what to do with it. A portion would go to helping Kesha and her brother start a new life, and the rest would fund a scholarship for children affected by violent crime. "I understand now, Dad," Maya whispered to the stone, "why you did what you did. I'm sorry I spent so many years being angry with you, believing you'd abandoned me because I was a burden." Her voice caught, but she continued, "You gave everything for me, your safety, your future, your life. I promise I won't waste the chance you gave me." Laura placed a comforting hand on Maya's shoulder. "He would be so proud of the woman you've become," she said softly. "Your strength, your compassion, your determination to help others. That's his legacy, living on through you." Maya stood, wiping away her tears. "And through you, Grandma. The way you protected me all these years, kept paying them to keep me safe. You carried such a heavy burden alone." "Not alone," Laura corrected gently. "Evan was with me in my heart. And now, the truth is out. We can both remember him as he truly was. Not perfect, perhaps, but a father who loved his daughter more than his own life." Maya nodded, a sense of peace settling over her despite the lingering grief. In the days since her rescue, the anger she had harbored for so long had dissolved, replaced by understanding and a deep appreciation for the sacrifices both her father and grandmother had made. The truth had been painful to learn, but it had also been healing. She beckoned to Kesha, inviting her to approach the grave. The young woman stepped forward hesitantly, placing her wildflowers beside the more formal arrangements. "Your dad was kind to us when no one else was," Kesha said quietly. "He gave us hope, even if it was just for a little while. I never forgot that." Maya squeezed her hand in silent gratitude. In the aftermath of the arrests, Kesha had provided crucial testimony against Vince Morello and his organization, ensuring they would face justice not only for the kidnapping and extortion, but also for the murders of both Evan Rowan and Kesha's mother. Her courage had helped dismantle a criminal enterprise that had terrorized vulnerable people for decades. As the small group began to make their way back toward the cemetery gates, Detective Harmon approached them. "I wanted to let you know," he said, addressing both Maya and Laura, "that we've connected Morello to at least 7 other murders over the past 20 years. Your testimony, along with Kesha's, has been invaluable in building our case against him. He won't see the outside of a prison for the rest of his life." "Thank you," Maya said sincerely, "for everything your team has done for us." The detective nodded respectfully before departing, leaving the family to their grief and healing. Later that evening, back in the home they shared, Maya sat with her grandmother in the living room, a photo album open between them. It was filled with pictures of Evan, as a boy, as a young man, as Maya's father, images that had been tucked away for years because they were too painful for both women to look at, though for very different reasons. "Tell me about this one," Maya said, pointing to a photograph of her father holding her as an infant, his face alight with pride and wonder. Laura smiled, the memories no longer tainted by the secret she had carried for so long. "That was the day we brought you home from the hospital. He wouldn't let anyone else hold you for hours. He said you were the most perfect thing he'd ever seen." As Laura continued to share stories, happy ones, funny ones, everyday moments that painted a picture of the man her father had truly been, Maya felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. The anger and resentment that had been her companions for 15 years had finally lifted, leaving room for forgiveness, understanding, and love. Her father had given her the gift of life twice, once when she was born, and again when he sacrificed everything to ensure she would survive her illness. Now, knowing the truth at last, Maya could honor that gift by living her life with the same courage and compassion he had shown.